Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome tonight's Master of Ceremonies, Bradley A. Smith.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to the Center for Competitive Politics 10-year anniversary celebration. And this is a celebration, so have wine with dinner and have fun. As the man, the voice of God has said, I'm Brad Smith. I'm the chairman of CCP. And we started this 10 years ago, and it's been a great privilege to watch it grow. And it's grown in large part to the support that many of you in this room have given us, sometimes financially and sometimes otherwise. We've got a great program tonight. We're going to try to show off a bit of CCP. We have two of the hardest men in Washington to schedule together on one stage, George Will and U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. That in and of itself is an amazing achievement. So this is a really special night you'll probably never see again in Washington, D.C. This should be two of the best hours of your life. To kick things off, I'm going to ask Catherine Rosario to lead us in the national anthem. Catherine.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Catherine, very much. I can't tell you all what a pleasure it is to see you here tonight to celebrate 10 years of CCP. You know, it's easy for those of us who believe in free speech to feel as if we're constantly on the defensive. We see so many governmental and quasi-governmental and nowadays sometimes mob actions aimed at shutting down free speech. We see Tea Party groups targeted for delay and harassment by the IRS. We see state regulators in California and New York demanding private donor information from charities for no discernible reason that we can tell. And I could go on, but most of you have firsthand experience or at least good knowledge of what I'm talking about. And of course, we face a nonstop stream of news editorials and hostile press coverage. So it's easy to think that we are forever playing defense. But tonight's a celebration. And if we take a longer view, I think we should find that it's a good night for some optimism. As we gather here to celebrate tonight, it's worth thinking about where we were just 10 years ago when CCP was founded. Despite the best efforts of a brilliant legal team assembled by Senator McConnell, the Supreme Court had upheld all of the major provisions of the misnamed Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, a.k.a. McCain-Feingold, a.k.a. speech-squelching pile of legislative prevarication. And those opposed to free speech have vowed to get rid of the Federal Election Commission and replace it with a campaign speech czar drawn from their own ranks. They talk triumphantly of new limits and tax financing schemes. And worse yet, the court's lackadaisical opinion in McCain-Feingold or in McConnell legislation had suggested that virtually any future legislation would likely be upheld against constitutional challenge. 10 years ago, sympathetic congressional committee staffers didn't even know where they could go for witnesses. FEC regulatory proceedings were dominated by anti-speech groups. When it came time for litigation, the government defending its anti-speech laws typically appeared in court with a phalanx of the same group supporting them. They would commission research to support their arguments and drop that research if it inconveniently proved them wrong. And nearly everyone in the press seemed to be on their side. And it was in that environment that a pair of private citizens approached me in the summer of 2005 to discuss what I thought should be done, and from those conversations sprung the Center for Competitive Politics. The organization would be a center both for litigation in the public interest and a leader in conducting research and in educating the public, the press, and policymakers about the benefits of free speech in a democracy. To be honest, I can't say exactly when CCP started. Our formal date of incorporation, I looked up, was October 19th, 2005, but we'd begun operating before that. Our tax-deductible status was not approved for several more weeks, which, by the way, reminds me, it is nearing year end, and deductions or contributions to the center are tax-deductible, and there are staff at many of your tables. Except for some money that I put up for incidental expenses, we didn't get a first cash contribution until it was December 28th, 2005, from a very generous anonymous donor. By that time, Steve Hursting, who is here tonight, had already been working as executive director for a couple of months without pay. Supreme Court litigator Eric Jaffe had donated his services to help us file our first brief in the Supreme Court. For our first office, Chip Meller at the Institute for Justice sublet us space at a ridiculously low rent and threw in for free someone to answer the phone. So many people in this room have made our efforts possible and our growth possible over these 10 years. And I hate to mention any, I've already mentioned a couple, because I can't begin to mention all of you. So if you're among the many that I don't mention tonight, please know that I know, and I know what you've done, and it means a great deal to me. Early on, we were ridiculed. Jerry Heber of the Anti-Speech Campaign Legal Center. Yeah, boo. Jerry Heber said of us, "They're annoying, like mosquitoes are annoying. Most people don't take them seriously." But in fact, I think the founding of CCP marked a major turn in the debate. In the decade before our founding, the good guys had never won a case in the Supreme Court, a campaign finance case. In the decade since, we haven't lost. Now, some people, the skeptics, they'll credit that to the appointment of John Roberts and Sam Alito. Okay, fine, if you want to do that. But seriously, even with those additions, these changes only come to fruition with good arguments and good cases brought to the court and to the lower courts. If you feel that we're on the defensive these days, think of how those poor saps in the speech-squelching community must feel. Over the last 10 years, they've seen Citizens United, and we have some folks from Citizens United here in front. They've watched as Speech Now versus FEC has allowed citizens to pool their resources to speak, crushing their ability to control the debate. They've seen a series of strong FEC commissioners, several of whom are here tonight, who take the law and the First Amendment seriously and who do not... I usually don't get any applause during my speeches, so I'm not used to having to pause for applause. I'm a professor, right? The students are like... In any case, they've seen these commissioners who take the law and the First Amendment seriously and don't go out looking for ways to expand their power. And they've seen the Supreme Court gut their efforts to force candidates into rigged systems of government finance campaigns. They've watched President Obama himself effectively scuttle tax financing of presidential campaigns. They've seen the repeal of tax finance campaigns in at least 4 states, the abolition of tax finance conventions at the national level, and a giant increase in federal party contribution limits. And finally, their efforts to compel compulsory disclosure to include private speech about issues have repeatedly failed in Congress and in many states. And many of these legislative achievements federally are due to the efforts of our honoree tonight. They've seen nearly 40% of the states that have limits on individual contributions raise those limits since 2010 in response to the pressure placed on candidates by super PACs. So we sit appalled when we see things like the abuse of power by state regulators in Wisconsin. But remember that thanks in large part to the tremendous courage of one of CCP's founding board members, Eric O'Keefe, who's here tonight, that state agency has been abolished, and Wisconsin's law has gone from one of the worst in the nation Wisconsin's law has gone from one of the worst in the nation to a national model for deregulation. And the cost to Eric has been high, but thanks to his effort, our side has won. When we see the reformers now trying to use the FCC and the SEC and the IRS to regulate, remember it's because they can't pass things anymore through Congress or the FEC or get the courts to endorse everything that it is they try to do. So indeed, if you are a campaign finance reformer, a speech squelcher, almost everywhere you look, you see free speech winning. And as Jerry Heber would say, that is annoying. We're very proud today that in addition to being annoying, the New York Times now calls CCP the, quote, intellectual powerhouse of the movement to deregulate campaign finance. For the first time, there is a place dedicated to free political speech where the press knows it can go. No longer can so-called reformers say that whatever they want to the press and know it will go unchallenged. No longer can reform groups monopolize comments at the FEC. Credit goes to so many other people, to David Bossie and Citizens United, to the ACLU, to its longtime litigator Joel Gora, to Jim Bopp, who's fought so many of these cases in the trenches, to Cleta Mitchell, to people like Ed Crane and Roger Pilon and the whole Cato crew, to litigators like Jan Barron and Bobby Birchfield, who fought these battles in court long before there were any public interest bar on our side, to our great friends and allies at the Institute for Justice, to citizens like Sean McCutcheon and some of the people we'll introduce you to on screen in a few minutes who have had the courage to challenge the government in court. I can't begin, as I've said, to name all those who deserve credit. But I like to believe that the creation of CCP gave new life to the pro-speech movement. At a very dark time for campaign speech, it was an announcement, we're not dead yet, and I hope it gave encouragement to those who have worked with us these last 10 years and alongside us. And I thank you all for that.